Okay, so I'm going to talk about feedback loops through the lens of technology procurement. Now, a little bit about me. You may have noticed that I'm British. That doesn't mean that I work for the government digital service. Not all British people work for the government digital service. And to be clear, I have never worked for the government digital service. I work at Code for America. We're going to talk about feedback loops through the lens of technology procurement, which might be a bit weird, might not necessarily make a lot of sense. Why are we talking about technology procurement, and why are we talking about digital services in the terms of feedback loops? Well, because making policy based on data and making policy based on user needs requires digital services that support those feedback loops in the first place. It means that the technology that we use to deliver government services must collect useful, actionable data so that policymakers understand needs and then can be flexible enough so that services can be improved regularly and frequently. How can we make sure that we're getting the things, that we're using the tools and developing and delivering the services that we need that will enable those feedback loops in the first place? And those services are procured. And right now, more or less, the way that governments buy technology is biased towards things that are satisfying policy needs, not user needs. It is very, very easy. We know this. It's very easy to go from a piece of legislation and go for a piece of policy and then create an RFP from that policy. And it's very difficult to untangle that. Or there is a lot of inertia that means that it's very easy to go from that piece of policy and then create an RFP or create a procurement that says we need to buy the thing that will deliver this thing over here that is written down. Of course, if you're here listening to me and it's Friday at the Code for America Summit, then you already know why policy-led procurement is bad. You already know, because everyone's been talking, and we've been talking for the last few years, about putting users' needs first. And I want to just lead with a quote from Yoda, who, as we all know, is the Grand Master of Digital Services for the Jedi Order. And as he put so well, policy-based procurement is the path to the dark side because it leads to services that don't meet user needs. Not meeting user needs leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering, and sometimes literal suffering in the case of very badly needed government services for vulnerable populations. So we're on Yoda's, just to be clear, we're on Yoda's side. We're not on the Empire's side. So that's why, if you don't take anything else away, because Yoda said procurement is important for feedback loops, that's why procurement is important for feedback loops. So if we want policy, and you're going to hear about this from the other speakers today, if we want policy based on data and user needs, we need services that collect that data and surface user needs so that we can iterate our policy. We need the services that will help us observe, orient, decide, and then act, that enable all of that. If we want digital services that collect the data and surface those user needs that can inform the next round of policy, we need to change the way and improve the way that we are procuring those services right now. The ones that we are mainly procuring right now are not geared up to do that. So there's two things we need to do. We need to procure technology that enables feedback loops, buy the right thing. But to do that, we also need to procure technology using feedback loops so that we can deliver the right thing. Because we also need to use feedback loops to improve the way that we're procuring, to improve the services and the technology that we are getting, that we're buying, that we're developing, that we're going to use to deliver these services. Because I think most people in the audience here understand that for a typical technology procurement process, the feedback loop is super, super, super long. Feedback can take months or even years before working software is delivered into the hands of users. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. 3 very simple things, ripped literally from BuzzFeed News. This playbook's amazing tips to introduce feedback loops into technology procurement, which is not the story that they did when we launched this. So we recently published an alpha government technology procurement playbook based on work that we did with the California Department of Social Services on an in-progress RFP for a new child welfare system. And these are the things that you can do when you're procuring that will help you procure with better feedback loops. If you have big services, if you have a monolithic RFP, you might be able to look at it right now and see that there are logical, smaller components inside of it that you can break into smaller parts. That will reduce risk. You will get things more quickly because if you require frequent delivery to users, then you will get that feedback more quickly. The sooner you can get whatever it is that you're procuring, or the sooner that you can get a developed solution, that very first step, into the hands of users, you are going to know whether it's any good or not. And the last thing that we found was that frequently in the decide and act stage of that OODA, that observe, orient, decide, act loop, there are frequently organizational layers that aren't predisposed to making decisions. They might be predisposed to having to make decisions through consensus. They might be committees, or 3 committees, or 5 committees, or 7 committees. Committees layers deep that when you're peeling them back just reveal more committees. One of the things that we have found that actually leads to better outcomes in terms of procuring services that actually work for their users is making sure that you have someone in charge who can make the decisions. That doesn't mean that you need to completely get rid of the committees, but taking a look at the organizational layers that are anticipated by an RFP and making sure that they're stripped away so that you can enable that loop of seeing what's happened and then doing something about it. That's fundamentally the easy thing that we're talking about feedback loops. So I've gone over my 5 minutes already. I probably should have cut the slide about Yoda. Say no, come on. The playbook is up now. It's in alpha. That means that we need your feedback on it so that we can improve it. It's at codeforamerica.org/playbook/technology playbook. Please give me feedback. We want to make this an excellent resource that we can all use together. Thanks very much.